Hi class, this is Professor Harmon Kim and this video is for the lecture of week 3, October 25th. Last week you studied Four Noble Truths preached by the Buddha in the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutra. I strongly encourage students to read Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta from Samyutta Nikaya. This is the first sermon the Buddha preached to the 5 ascetics. The Four Noble Truths. The concept of truth is integrally linked to the concept of knowledge. Then, what is knowledge? This question will be raised in the context of some ways that Buddhists have framed the notion. Bertrand Russell stated that no definition can be satisfactory which introduces the word knowledge, because this word is highly ambiguous and also because every one of its possible meanings can only be made clear after much epistemological discussion. I will bring some clarity to the question of knowledge by exploring it through the lens of Buddhism in a cross-cultural light. The main issue concerning knowledge will be discussed in terms of conceptual versus perceptual knowledge. Let's think about the notion of knowledge in Buddhism. An important characteristic of knowledge in classical Indian thought is that knowledge is temporally structured. It is episodic. A Sanskrit root that can mean knowledge is jhana, which is cognate with the English term know. Deriving from jhana is prajna, meaning higher knowledge, discernment, or insight. So, jhana has a broad semantic range. In a Buddhist context, this important notion is divided into 3 types based on the source from which it derives. One is knowledge through studying. Second, knowledge through contemplation. Third, knowledge through meditation. These are the 3 types of knowledge. Each of these 3 types reflect a different level of knowledge. For instance, simple hearing about a topic like impermanence and death is one kind of knowledge. It's like knowledge from studying. Contemplating impermanence and death, that represent knowledge through contemplation. Integrating the understanding of impermanence and death through meditation is knowledge through meditation. And knowledge through meditation brings forth an even further assimilation of its meaning. In Mahayana Buddhism, you probably heard about Prajnaparamita, which is translated in perfection of knowledge. The perfection of knowledge in Mahayana Buddhism is liberating knowledge, and it guides other Buddhist practice such as generosity, discipline, and patience. This knowledge is integral to the path of awakening. It is likened to vision and the other practice to method. In other words, vision and method go together. If with only knowledge and no method, one is said to be like a sighted person without a leg. And if, with only method without knowledge, one is like a blind person with legs. It is through the cooperation of the two wings of knowledge, expressed in vision, and method, expressed in legs, that the path to awakening is traveled upon. The perfection of knowledge is insight into the ultimate truth, such as no self and emptiness of things. For Buddhist tradition, knowledge of the ultimate truth is the most important type of knowledge because it enables liberation from false concepts. And false concepts distort the experience of the world and bring suffering. However, skepticism about the possibility of knowledge lingers close to Buddhist claims of emptiness. Nagarjuna, who is Buddhist philosopher during the 2nd century, he argued that the means of knowledge depends on the object of that knowledge, while the validity of those objects are in turn confirmed by the validity of the means. Nagarjuna stated that if for you the establishment of warranted object is by means of reliable source of knowledge, and the establishment of a reliable source of knowledge is by means of warranted object, neither is established for you. Nagarjuna points out here that the status of knowledge is determined by the status of the object known, and vice versa. For example, the validity of a perception of smoke is confirmed by clear eyesight, and yet clear eyesight in turn is confirmed by smoke being seen. They are mutually confirming. The status of both the knower and the known mutually rise and fall. Other than an appeal to consensus, there is no way out of the circularity without affirming a foundational knowledge. In the 20th century, a Tibetan philosopher named Gendun Chapal elaborated on the implication of Nagarjuna's view in terms of the relationship between inference and perception. He stated like this: the object of inferential cognition comes from a mind of perception, and perception is discerned by inference as veridical or defective. This makes the son the father's witness. I am uncomfortable with asserting conventional reality as validly established. Gendun Champo here reiterates the circularity of the warrant of knowledge and the content of knowledge. He does so in terms of a dichotomy of knowledge, inferential knowledge and perceptual knowledge. Inferential knowledge and perceptual knowledge were made by Indian scholar named Dignaga under the category of valid means of knowledge. Dignaga is Indian scholar during the 6th century. He was a primary architect of an influential system of Buddhist epistemology. Epistemology in Pali pramana, or means of knowledge. Epistemology has an important role to play in the way that knowledge has been framed within philosophical tradition across India. In Buddhist philosophy, the knowledge of reality, the truth of how things are, can be seen to oscillate between a denial of any final nature of reality to an experiential ground of reality that enfolds the domain of epistemology and ontology. And the knowledge of reality culminates in a unified experience of the truth as to how things are. Let's consider question about knowledge in the light of Buddhist epistemology by distinguishing between conceptual knowledge and perceptual knowledge. In formulating a Buddhist theory of knowledge, Dignaga described a dichotomy of conception and perception. Inference conceives unreal universals and perception perceive real particulars. Particulars are the objects of perception rather than linguistic entities or objects of thought that are the domain of inference. In contrast to the particulars that constitute perceptual content, inferences apprehend universals because when we use concept and language, we necessarily think and speak in terms of general universal properties. A universal is a concept of a distributed entity, for example, fire, cup, or self. It is a class of things that is held to be the same across space and time. In this tradition, all such notions of enduring singular things are conceptual and distortion of reality. Because Buddhists like Dignaga claim that all conditioned things are impermanent. They do not impute a reality to static entity above and beyond their status as conceptual constructions. For instance, we use the word fire, F-I-R-E, here's typo, not F-O-R-E, F-I-R-E, to convey the meaning of a common property of something that is hot and burn. But such a universal property, distributed across all particular instances of what we call fire, does not exist out in the world. We use the word fire to refer to something that is extended in time and space. For example, yesterday's fire in California forest, a forest fire, or a kitchen fire are all fire. But no such singular object really exists outside our imputation. A concept or universal exists only in our thought and language, not in the real world. That is, we do not get burned by the singular fire that we input with our thought and words. We get burned by particular instances of fire that are hot and burn. We can see in this Buddhist epistemology a dichotomy of unmistaken non-conceptual perception and mistaken conceptual thought. Yet the reality of unique particulars, being non-conceptual, cannot be expressed, and this creates a problem. If we cannot talk about them, how can we know them? Isn't there more to knowledge than expressibility? If so, how can we really know it? While non-conceptual cognition have a privileged place in Dignagar's epistemology, its status is dubious because an implication of being non-conceptual is a lack of communicability and determinacy. Two ways of addressing the problem of reconciling conception and perception reflect two broad tendencies in philosophical thought, that is, rationalism and empiricism. A rationalist seeks logical coherence and sees the logical processes of reason and rationality as arbitrator of true knowledge. For the rationalist, to count as knowledge is to be communicable and rationally justified. An empiricist, in contrast, believes that experience is primary and that what is known through the sense is the baseline for knowledge rather than logical coherence. Empiricists hold knowledge to be accountable to experience, regardless of whether we can fit experiences neatly into our logical categories. The debate between rationalism and empiricism has continued to animate a philosophical conversation in ancient and modern philosophies across the globe. One of American philosopher named Wilfred Saller states that an experience does not count as knowledge until it is brought into the logical space of reason. Therefore, an experience alone cannot count as knowledge. Experience only becomes knowledge when we rationally justify it. In contrast, empiricist gives pride of place to perception and distinguish experiential knowledge from the abstract intellectualism of the rationalist. While Buddhist epistemology shares an affinity with an empiricist stance, empiricism, as developed in Europe and North America, has primarily appealed to sensory perception. In Buddhist epistemology, however, sources of knowledge go beyond the five senses to include mental perception, as well as distinctively meditative knowledge that result from contemplative training. So in West, there are five sense organs, but in Buddhism, there are six sense organs. In addition to five sense organs, one more sense organ is mind, so-called. Therefore, in Buddhist perspective, meditative knowledge that also result by cultivating pure mind training. Dharmakirti is one of Dignaga's commentators. Dharmakirti outlined four means of valid perception. What are those four means of valid perception? First, sense perception. So eyes, ears, nose, tongue, and skin will belong to sense perception. The other valid perception is mental perception. Third valid perception is self-awareness. The last valid perception is yogic perception. These mental perception, self-awareness, and yogic perception have an important place to play in Buddhist theory of knowledge. Let's consider the sense perception. We can ask the following question about the sensory knowledge. Is seeing believing? That is, the eyes register blue, but does that constitute knowing blue? If so, then when the lens of the camera registers blue, does that constitute knowledge of blue too? This leads to further questions, such as what is perceived when we perceive blue? How can conception relate to perception? If it is true that conceptual knowledge knows only universals, such as concept, and that sense perception interact only with inexpressible particulars, then what joins these two? One attempt to address the problem of joining perception to concept, familiar to 20th century sense data theories, is to assert a temporal gap between perception and conception. So when you see blue, your eyes see blue, or you recognize the blue color. When your eyes see the blue color, that could be perception. And when you realize you are seeing blue color, that could be conception. What is the gap between perception and conception? What connect between two? I mentioned a temporal gap between perception and conception. A second instance of conceptual knowledge forms a judgment following the first moment of a bear, such as non-conceptual perceptual encounter with the raw data, RAW, raw feels, or ineffable sense data. In fact, Buddhists have described mental perception as what serves to join the perceptual to the conceptual in this way. It acts as a kind of filter for the stimuli that surrounds us. In other words, whenever your sense organ hit the stimulus, the first moment is perception. But from perception, you cannot know what you see. Then the following moment is conception. So after first moment, you can know what you see. Then what is the bridging role between perception and conception? The distinction between knowledge from the five sense perception and from mental perception, known as the sixth sense, we can call them mind, can be expressed as the difference between knowing blue color versus knowing that it is blue. This difference between seeing and seeing as. So seeing as in knowing blue and seeing as knowing that it is blue is linked to the role of mental perception. Mental perception has been positioned as that which interpret the raw data of particulars, such as perception, and convert perception into a conceptual knowledge or judgment. Dharmakirti comment and characterize mental perception as a cognition that apprehends its object as this. The category of mental perception is one that Buddhists have drawn upon to reconcile conception and perception. Another attempt to relate perception and conception is found in the role of self-awareness, another category of perception. I introduced that there are four kinds of valid means of perception. One was sense perception, mental perception, self-awareness, and yogic perception. In 13th century, self-awareness is attributed to the role of bridging the gap between content-free perception and conceptual cognition. Here's an analogy of an interlocutor introducing a blind speaker as conception to a mute seer perception. So mute seer cannot express what they see. But blind speaker can speak, but this person does not know what they see. Self-awareness as a type of immediate perception. Self-awareness serves as a bridge between conceptually mediated knowledge and non-conceptual cognition. Non-conceptual cognition. Non-conceptual means immediate, right after sense perception. In every instant of cognition, there is an immediate self-awareness. Even in a case of mistaken conceptual knowledge, there is an aspect that is non-conceptual and indubitable. Knowledge is tied to the truth. Upon studying the Four Noble Truths, the Four Noble Truths shed light on understanding the definition of knowledge, and Four Noble Truths emphasize our sensory perception and self-awareness to fully comprehend each truth of Four Noble Truths, such as suffering, the cause of suffering, the cessation of suffering, the way leading to the cessation of suffering. All these truths we can experience by way of sense perception and realize by way of self-awareness. So Buddhism is completely based on experience. Let's solve the quiz question. What is the meaning of prajna? Jhana is knowledge. Prajna or prajna paramita, this prajna means what? I already expressed this answer in the previous slide, so you can find the answer. Second question. Which of the following is not one of four means of valid perception outlined by Dharmakirti? So I introduce four types of valid means of perception. One was sense perception, we studied today, and also I introduce self-awareness, and also mental perception and yogic perception. Maybe we will deal with that sometime later. So you can find the answer to this question. The last question. What is the valid means of knowledge proposed by Dignaga? Dignaga proposed a dichotomy. What are those two? The first moment and the very next to the first moment. What is called the first moment? In Pali, it is called pratyaksa. And the very next second moment is called anumana. Those are Pali words, but how these words translate in English? I use this term many times in this lecture, so you can easily find what other valid means of knowledge proposed by Dignaga. So you can find the answer. Once you solve 3 quiz questions, you need to send the answer to my email. So this is routine process. You know my email address. Include your email address also. And subject title is BMN 514, and please include the date October 25th. And please write down your official name, last name, comma, followed by first name. You can write down your official name and 3 quiz answers directly into main body of text. You don't have to necessarily generate file and attach it to the email because the content of your assignment is very short. Your name and 3 quiz answers. So some students still make separate document and attach, but you can directly write down your official name and answers of 3 quiz questions into the main text body of email. Also keep in mind, do not swap the position of your last name and first name, and do not use your nickname. And the due of this assignment is October 31st. This is the end of lecture.